The unexpected will. Ethan Walker had never imagined receiving a message from the Interstellar Inheritance Bureau. He wasn't rich. He wasn't famous. He was just a simple mechanic, fixing old ships on a small station orbiting Mars. So when a sleek black drone arrived at his workshop, flashing an official hologram, his gut told him something was wrong. The message began in a calm, robotic voice. Ethan Walker, you are the sole heir of HFY. Please report to Galactic Probate Office 472B on Nexus Prime within 3 standard cycles. Failure to comply will result in forfeiture of all assets. Ethan's heart nearly stopped. HFY, the old alien, the only non-human friend he had in this cold, empty galaxy. His hands tightened into fists. HFY was dead. It didn't make sense. Just 2 weeks ago, they had exchanged messages. HFY had told him about his latest business deal, some trade agreement with high-level diplomats. He had sounded excited, even nervous, but never in danger. And now he was gone. More than that, he had left everything to Ethan. It had to be a mistake. But deep inside, a part of Ethan knew the truth. If this was real, then HFY must have had a reason. And if HFY had a reason, then something bad was coming. Arrival on Nexus Prime. 3 days later, Ethan stood in the massive Galactic Probate Office, surrounded by aliens of all shapes and sizes. He had taken the first transport to Nexus Prime. But the closer he got to the truth, the worse he felt. His stomach twisted as he watched the holographic legal assistant explain the details of HFY's will. HFY has transferred all his assets, properties, and business holdings to you, Ethan Walker. The hologram droned. As per the binding agreement, you have inherited the Kitten estate, wealth totaling 38 million credits, and... The voice paused. Ethan frowned. And what? A shimmering image appeared in front of him. A tall, elegant alien woman stood before him, her violet eyes glowing with unreadable emotion. Her long, silver hair flowed down her back, and her skin shimmered like polished pearl. She looked stunning. The hologram continued. You have also inherited the life-bonded spouse of HFY, as per the customs of the Kitten lineage. Ethan blinked. Wait, what? The assistant nodded. By the laws of his homeworld, his wife, Vayara, is now under your guardianship. Your marriage contract has been legally transferred. Ethan nearly choked. I inherited his wife. At that moment, Vayara stepped forward. She wasn't crying. She wasn't in mourning. She just stared at him, her expression unreadable. You are the one he chose. Her voice was calm, but something sharp lurked beneath it. Ethan scratched the back of his head. I guess. Vayara's violet eyes narrowed. Then I will warn you only once. You should leave. Now. Ethan frowned. What? Why? Before she could answer, the doors to the office burst open. Armed guards stormed in, their weapons raised. A deep mechanical voice echoed through the chamber. Ethan Walker, by order of the Galactic Syndicate, you are under arrest. The first clue. Chaos erupted. Ethan barely had time to react before Vayara moved. She wasn't just beautiful, she was fast. In a blur, she struck the first guard, disarming him before he could fire. Run, she shouted. Ethan, still in shock, obeyed. He ducked behind a desk as energy blasts flew past his head. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a fighter. He was just a mechanic caught in something way bigger than him. Vayara dragged him toward an emergency exit, taking down another attacker with precise, deadly strikes. Ethan had no idea who she really was, but one thing was clear. She wasn't just some grieving widow. They barely made it out of the building before alarms started blaring across the city. As they ran through the neon-lit streets of Nexus Prime, Ethan turned to Vayara, breathing hard. What the hell is going on? She stopped, looking at him with a cold, serious expression. They killed him, she said. And now, they'll come for you. Ethan felt his blood turn cold. Sevar hadn't just left him a fortune. He had left him a target. And Ethan Walker was now in the middle of a deadly game he didn't even understand. A wife, a contract, and a deadly secret. The cold air of Nexus Prime hit Ethan like a shockwave as he and Vayara sprinted through the chaotic streets. The towering alien skyscrapers around them gleamed with neon lights, advertisements flashing in hundreds of different languages. Crowds of alien pedestrians moved in every direction, oblivious to the fact that two fugitives were running for their lives. Ethan's heart pounded. His lungs burned. His mind screamed. How the hell did this happen? 1 minute, he was a simple mechanic. The next, he was running through a foreign city with an alien woman he had apparently inherited. Blaster fire echoed behind them. The Galactic Syndicate's enforcers were in pursuit. Their dark armored figures pushed through the crowd, shouting in harsh, guttural tones. Ethan barely dodged a shot that sizzled past his ear. Vayara grabbed his wrist and yanked him into a side alley, pressing him against the cold metal wall. Her violet eyes flickered, scanning their surroundings with terrifying precision. "Stay quiet," she whispered. Ethan forced himself to breathe slowly, his mind still trying to process everything. "They're after me," he whispered. "Why?" Vayara didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached into the folds of her long, flowing robe and pulled out a sleek, silver device. With a flick of her wrist, it projected a small holographic map of the city. She pointed to a flashing red dot. "They're tracking you," she said. "We need to get that implant out of your body before they close in." Ethan blinked. "Implant. I don't have." Her fingers moved to his left forearm, pressing firmly. A sudden sting made him jerk back. "Then what is this?" she said, showing him a tiny, pulsing light just beneath his skin. Ethan's stomach twisted. That wasn't there before. Vayara's expression hardened. "They tag you the moment you walked into that office. The Syndicate must have people inside the Inheritance Bureau." Ethan exhaled sharply, trying to think. "Okay, so let's remove it." Vayara gave him a long, unreadable look before pulling a small, curved blade from her belt. "This will hurt." Before he could protest, she made a precise cut, extracting a tiny metallic device from his arm. Ethan bit down a curse, his muscles tensing. Vayara crushed the tracker beneath her boot. "Now," she said, wiping the blood from her blade, "we need to talk. The contract that changed everything." They found shelter in an abandoned repair station on the outskirts of the city. Dim, flickering lights buzzed overhead, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Ethan wrapped a bandage around his arm, watching Vayara pace the room like a caged predator. "Start talking," he said. "Why did Sevar leave me everything? What the hell is going on?" Vayara stopped. For a long moment, she didn't say anything. Then she reached into her cloak and pulled out a small, glass-like tablet. It activated with a soft hum, displaying a holographic message. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. It was Sevar. His old alien friend stared at him with tired eyes, his deep blue skin lined with age. "Ethan, if you're seeing this, it means I am dead." His voice was calm, but there was a weight behind it, something unspoken. "And if you are still alive, it means you are in danger." Ethan swallowed hard. "You have questions," the message continued. "I wish I could explain everything in person, but time has run out. What I have left you is not just wealth, it is power. And power always attracts enemies." Sevar's gaze darkened. "The Syndicate is coming for what I built. They killed me for it. And now, they will come for you." The message flickered. "I have made arrangements. Trust her, Ethan. She knows more than she lets on." Sevar turned his gaze slightly, and for the first time, the hologram captured Vayara standing behind him. She looked younger, softer, but her eyes still held the same fire. "I chose you," Sevar said, "because you are the only one I trust." The message ended. Silence filled the room. Ethan exhaled shakily. This is insane. Vayara's voice was quiet. It's the truth. Ethan looked up at her. Then tell me the rest. Vayara hesitated. Then she walked to the window, staring out at the city beyond. HFY wasn't just a businessman, she said. He was a leader, a revolutionary. He built an empire not just of wealth, but of secrets. He had information that could bring down the Galactic Syndicate. Ethan frowned. And you knew about this? Her shoulders tensed. I was his wife. I knew some things, but not everything. Ethan ran a hand through his hair. So what now? Do I just walk away? Vayara turned, her expression unreadable. If you walk away, they'll kill you. The choice that could kill him. Ethan felt like the walls were closing in. He didn't ask for this. He never wanted to be some rich tycoon or revolutionary leader. He just wanted a simple life, fixing ships and earning a decent living. Now he was trapped. What do you want from me? He asked finally. Vayara stepped closer. I want you to survive, she said. Because if you die, everything HFY fought for dies with you. Ethan swallowed. He wasn't sure if he trusted her. He wasn't sure if he trusted anyone anymore. But one thing was clear. HFY had chosen him for a reason. And now it was time to find out why. As they prepared to leave the hideout, Ethan turned to Vayara. One last question. She raised an eyebrow. Are we actually married? For the first time, she smirked. Legally, yes. Ethan groaned. Great. Before she could reply, an explosion rocked the building. The syndicate had found them. And this time, there was no escape. The enemy within. The explosion shattered the silence like a war drum. Ethan barely had time to react before the shockwave threw him backward. He hit the ground hard, gasping as dust and debris rained down around him. The old repair station trembled, its rusted metal walls groaning from the impact. Somewhere in the chaos, he heard Vayara curse in her native tongue. The syndicate had found them. A sharp ringing filled his ears as he struggled to push himself up. Smoke curled through the air, thick and suffocating. He squinted through the haze, his heart pounding. Move, move, move. Vayara appeared beside him, gripping his arm. We need to go. Now. Ethan barely had time to nod before she yanked him to his feet. Blaster fire erupted outside. Through the cracked window, he could see syndicate enforcers swarming the area. Sleek black armor, visors glowing red, rifles raised. These weren't common thugs. These were elites. They weren't here to arrest him. They were here to kill him. The escape. Vayara pulled a sleek, curved blade from her belt. With practiced precision, she flipped it in her hand, then turned to Ethan. Can you fight? Ethan hesitated. I fix ships. Vayara exhaled sharply. Then stay behind me. She moved like a shadow. The first enforcer who stepped through the wreckage didn't even have time to react before she was on him. Her blade flashed, one precise strike to the throat. He dropped without a sound. The second attacker fired, but she was already moving. She twisted, dodging the shot, and in the next breath, she drove her blade into his chest. Ethan swallowed hard. Who the hell is this woman? Ethan, she snapped. He turned just in time to see another enforcer raising his weapon. Instinct took over. He grabbed the nearest thing, an old metal wrench from a workbench, and hurled it. It smacked into the enforcer's helmet with a dull thud. He staggered, disoriented. Vayara seized the opening. A single fluid movement, a flash of silver. The enforcer crumpled. Ethan stared at the body, his breath shallow. I think I'm gonna be sick. Vayara didn't respond. She grabbed his wrist and pulled him through the side door. More gunfire, more shouts, more syndicate enforcers closing in. Ethan ran. They darted through the back alleys of Nexus Prime, past towering neon billboards and grimy industrial tunnels. The city was alive around them, Hover cars zipped overhead. Alien merchants haggled in crowded markets, and gangs of cyborg thieves loitered in the shadows. But Ethan and Vayara weren't part of that world. They were prey, and the hunters weren't far behind. "We need to disappear," Vayara said. "Fast." Ethan glanced around, scanning the street. Then he saw it. An old hover transport, its engine still running while the owner argued with a vendor. He didn't think. He acted. He sprinted toward the vehicle, slid into the pilot's seat, and slammed the throttle forward. The hover transport jerked to life. Vayara leaped onto the side just as blaster fire struck the metal frame. Drive. Ethan didn't need to be told twice. The safe house and the betrayal. They didn't stop until they were deep in the underbelly of the city, a place where the law didn't exist. Dim red lights flickered as Ethan followed Vayara into an underground chamber beneath an abandoned warehouse. "Where are we?" he asked, catching his breath. "One of HFY's old safe houses," she said. "Only a few people know about this place." Ethan frowned. "And you trust them?" Vayara didn't answer. Instead, she walked to an old terminal and activated a holographic interface. A map of the galaxy flickered into view. Strange symbols flashed along the screen, information Ethan couldn't begin to decipher. "HFY's encrypted files," she muttered. "If we can decode this, we'll find out why they killed him." Ethan leaned closer. There were files labeled Syndicate Black Projects and classified Omega-level encryption. His stomach twisted. Whatever HFY had been involved in, it wasn't just business. Before he could process it, the door behind them clicked. A metallic lock. Vayara tensed, reaching for her weapon. The door slid open, and Ethan felt his heart drop. Standing in the doorway was a man he hadn't seen in years, Kellen Drake. Once, they had been friends. Once, they had worked together on cargo ships, repairing engines and telling stories about their future dreams. But Kellen's smile was cold now, and in his hand, he held a blaster. "Ethan," he said smoothly, "long time no see." Vayara stiffened. "Who is this?" Ethan's throat felt dry. "An old friend." Kellen chuckled. "I'd like to think so. But let's not pretend, Ethan. We both know why I'm here." Ethan's pulse pounded. "You're working for the Syndicate." Kellen sighed dramatically. "Oh, come on. It's just business." Vayara stepped forward, blade in hand. "If you were a friend, you wouldn't have brought a gun." Kellen shrugged. "You're right. That's why I also brought backup." The room flooded with armed soldiers. Ethan and Vayara were surrounded. Kellen smiled. "I really wish it didn't have to end like this." The cliffhanger. Ethan's mind raced. There was no way out. No escape. The files. The secrets. The inheritance. It was all meaningless if he didn't survive the next 5 minutes. He glanced at Vayara. She was tense, calculating. She wasn't ready to surrender. Neither was he. Ethan exhaled, steeling himself. Then, in the calmest voice he could manage, he muttered, "I have a really bad idea." Vayara's eyes flickered toward him. And just like that, he made his move. The chase begins. The room was deathly silent. Ethan's pulse thundered in his ears as he scanned the Syndicate soldiers surrounding them. Each one held a sleek black rifle, fingers hovering over the triggers. Their armor gleamed under the dim red lights of the safe house, visors glowing like the eyes of soulless machines. Kellen stood in the center, wearing that same smug grin. Ethan had seen this look before, back when they were kids, back when Kellen would bluff his way through a game of cards and walk away with everyone's winnings. But this wasn't a game. And Ethan had a sinking feeling that Kellen wasn't bluffing this time. "You should have just walked away, Ethan," Kellen said, shaking his head. "You're not built for this. You're a mechanic, not a revolutionary." Ethan forced a smirk. "That's funny. I don't remember asking for career advice." Kellen sighed. "Look, I'm doing you a favor. The Syndicate wants you dead. I convinced them to make you an offer instead." Ethan exchanged a glance with Vayara. She stood motionless beside him, but he could tell she was analyzing every detail, the positioning of the guards, the angles, the exits. She was waiting for something. For him. Kellen stepped forward. "Here's the deal, Ethan. Give me the files. Walk away. I'll even let you keep a little fortune for yourself. But if you don't," he gestured at the soldiers, "I won't be able to stop them." Ethan clenched his jaw. "So you kill me for money?" Kellen laughed. "Ethan, you're a smart guy. Do you know how much they're paying me for this?" Ethan narrowed his eyes. "How much?" Kellen's smirk widened. 50 million credits. Ethan let out a low whistle. "Dan, I had no idea I was worth so much." "You're not," Kellen said. "The information is." Vayara finally spoke. "If HFY's files are that valuable, why are you wasting time negotiating?" Kellen turned his cold gaze on her. "Because I almost feel bad for the guy." Almost. Vayara's fingers twitched toward the hidden knife at her waist. Kellen sighed. "Yeah, but hey, business is business." Ethan's bad idea. Ethan exhaled slowly, centering himself. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a warrior. But he was an engineer. And engineers knew how to make things explode. His hand inched toward the small device on the console behind him. A prototype electromagnetic pulse grenade, one of HFY's unfinished projects. If it worked, it would disable all electronic systems in a 10-meter radius. If it didn't, well, then they were all screwed. "All right," Ethan said, raising his hands. "You win, Kellen." Kellen's smirk grew. "Smart choice, buddy." Ethan took a slow step back, pretending to be resigned. He let his fingers brush against the device, feeling for the activation switch. Kellen turned to his men. "Take the files. Let's wrap this up." Ethan pressed the switch. A high-pitched whine filled the room. Then, boom! A shockwave of electromagnetic energy burst outward, short-circuiting every weapon, every visor, and every piece of tech in the room. The lights flickered and died. The Syndicate soldiers stumbled in confusion, their rifles suddenly useless. Kellen cursed, his comm link sparking violently. Ethan didn't waste a second. "Now," he shouted. Vayara moved. In the darkness, she became a phantom. Her blade sliced through the air, striking down the nearest soldier before he could recover. Ethan, fueled by adrenaline, grabbed a metal pipe and swung it into Kellen's gut, knocking him back. The room erupted into chaos. Ethan and Vayara fought their way through the blinded, disoriented enforcers, dodging punches and countering strikes. One soldier lunged at Ethan, but he ducked, sending the attacker crashing into a control panel. Sparks flew as the safe house's security systems overloaded. An alarm blared. "Time to go," Ethan yelled. Vayara nodded, slashing through one final soldier before sprinting toward the exit. Ethan followed, dodging gunfire from weapons that were slowly rebooting. As they burst into the alleyway, Kellen's furious voice echoed behind them. "Walker, you're dead." Ethan didn't look back. They had won this round, but the Syndicate wasn't going to stop coming. Hunted across the stars. The city was alive with neon lights and electric chaos. Ethan and Vayara wove through the crowded streets, past alien merchants and hovering speeders, their lungs burning from the chase. They needed a way off Nexus Prime. Fast. "Where's the nearest spaceport?" Ethan panted. Vayara pulled up a holomap. "Sector 7. It's heavily guarded." Ethan swore. "Great. What's Plan B?" Vayara hesitated. Then she spoke two words that made Ethan's stomach drop. "Black market." Ethan groaned. "I hate Plan B." But they had no choice. They headed toward the underbelly of Nexus Prime, the slums, the criminal districts, the places where even the Syndicate feared to tread. As they moved deeper into the city, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. His instincts were right. Because high above the rooftops, a pair of glowing red eyes tracked their every move. A silent hunter. A bounty hunter. One far deadlier than the syndicate soldiers. And he had just activated his contract. The betrayal. The neon glow of Nexus Prime's underbelly pulsed like a living organism. The deeper Ethan and Vayara moved into the black market district, the more the world around them changed. This was a place where laws didn't exist, where criminals and fugitives blended into the shadows, and where even the Galactic Syndicate hesitated to step without backup. Ethan kept his hood up, his muscles tense. He didn't trust anyone here. Not after what just happened. Not after Kellen. Vayara walked beside him, her posture rigid, her violet eyes flicking over every passerby like a trained predator. She was alert, more so than usual. "Someone's following us," she muttered. Ethan didn't look back. Syndicate. Vayara's jaw tightened. No, something worse. Ethan exhaled sharply. That's comforting. They continued down a winding alleyway, past towering stacks of scrap metal and flickering holograms advertising everything from illegal weapons to cybernetic enhancements. This was a place where money was king and loyalty was worth less than a handful of credits. Finally, they'd reached their destination, a small, dimly lit shop tucked between two decaying buildings. A rusted neon sign flickered overhead. Vax's Shipyard and Disposals. Vayara knocked once. The door slid open with a hiss. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of engine grease and burning circuitry. Ethan scanned the room. Rows of dismantled spacecraft parts, rusted hulls, and broken droids littered the floor. But the real business here wasn't ship repairs. It was forged ship registrations. Fake IDs. A way out. A hunched figure emerged from behind a counter, his 4 red eyes glinting under the dim light. Vax, a reptilian alien with scales dark as coal, let out a low hiss. Well, look what the black hole dragged in. His voice was smooth, almost amused. Vayara didn't expect to see you again. Ethan frowned. Again. Vayara stepped forward. We need a ship, something untraceable. Vax's eyes flicked toward Ethan. And this one. He's got Syndicate bounty written all over his face. Ethan tensed. Vayara didn't flinch. We'll pay. Vax let out a raspy chuckle. Of course you will. But the question is, how much? Before Vayara could respond, the shop's entrance suddenly slammed shut. The overhead lights flickered. And then Ethan heard it. The click of weapons. He turned slowly. 4 figures had emerged from the shadows, their guns raised. And standing in front of them, wearing that same damn smug grin, was Kellen Drake. Ethan's blood ran cold. The friend turned traitor. Well, Kellen said, shaking his head, you really should have taken my offer, Ethan. Ethan clenched his fists. How the hell did you find us? Kellen chuckled. Come on, man. We grew up together. I know how you think. Ethan's gut twisted. Of course. Kellen knew his habits, knew where he'd run, knew he wouldn't go to a syndicate-controlled port. Vayara stiffened beside him, her fingers inching toward her hidden blade. But Kellen's men were watching her closely. One wrong move, and they'd all be dead. Listen, Kellen said, lowering his gun slightly. I'll give you one last chance. Give me the files. Give me the girl. Walk away. Ethan's chest tightened. Give you Vayara. Kellen shrugged. The Syndicate wants her. Badly. I don't ask questions, I just get paid. Ethan felt anger rise in his chest. His old friend was willing to sell a woman. Someone HFY had trusted. To the people who had murdered him. I'm not handing her over, Ethan said coldly. Kellen sighed. Yeah, figured you'd say that. The next second, he pulled the trigger. The fight for survival. Ethan barely had time to react. Vayara moved first. The moment the blaster fired, she shoved Ethan to the ground. The energy bolt missed him by inches, slamming into a metal crate behind them. Then, all hell broke loose. Vax vanished behind the counter. Kellen's men opened fire. Vayara lunged, her blade flashing as she cut through the nearest attacker. Ethan rolled to the side, grabbing a discarded metal rod from the floor. He wasn't a soldier, but he could fight dirty. The next guy who got too close. Kiraikik. Ethan slammed the rod into his knee. The man howled, dropping his gun. Ethan grabbed it. Now he was armed. Kellen fired again. Ethan ducked, returning fire blindly. A blast struck a fuel container. Boom. The explosion ripped through the shop, sending debris flying. Smoke filled the air. Ethan coughed, barely keeping his footing. He saw Vayara fighting 2 men at once, her movements precise, lethal. Then, Kellen grabbed her from behind. "Vayara," Ethan shouted. She struggled, but Kellen pressed a gun to her temple. "Drop it," Kellen roared. Ethan's hands clenched around the blaster. Vayara met his gaze, her violet eyes, sharp, calculating. A silent message passed between them. She had a plan. Ethan exhaled. "Fine." He lowered the gun. Kellen smirked. "Smart choice," he said. Then, Vayara moved. With terrifying speed, she slammed her head backward into Kellen's face. Crack! He stumbled, blood spurting from his nose. She twisted, wrenching his gun free. Before he could react, she shot him. Once. Twice. Right in the chest. Kellen collapsed. The remaining syndicate soldiers, stunned, turned to flee. Vayara didn't chase them. She just stood there, breathing hard. Ethan stared at Kellen's body. He had always imagined they'd meet again, maybe share a drink, talk about old times. Now, his old friend was dead, and Ethan was the one responsible. Vayara walked over, wiping blood from her cheek. "We need to go." Ethan nodded. They turned to Vax, who peered over the counter with wide eyes. "You got a ship or not?" Ethan asked. Vax exhaled. "For the amount of trouble you just caused. Yeah, I got a ship. But I hope you know what you're getting into." Ethan laughed bitterly. "Trust me, I don't." The next move. They boarded the stolen ship, a sleek, black smuggler's vessel with no registration. As they powered up the engines, Ethan turned to Vayara. "You had a chance to kill Kellen back in the safe house," he said. "But you didn't." Vayara met his gaze. "I wanted you to see what he was." Ethan swallowed. Because now, there was no doubt. Kellen hadn't just been working for the Syndicate. He had been one of them. And that meant there were more. As the ship lifted off the surface of Nexus Prime, Ethan looked out at the stars ahead. He had started this journey as an ordinary man. Now he was a fugitive, a hunted man, a man with one last mission. Find out why Xyvar had died. And finish what he started. The final stand. The stolen ship cut through the vacuum of space like a silent predator. Ethan sat in the co-pilot's seat, gripping the armrests as Vayara piloted the sleek, black vessel away from Nexus Prime. The city planet shrank behind them, its neon skyline fading into the swirling void of the cosmos. His chest still felt tight. His hand still ached from gripping that damn blaster. Kellen was dead. Ethan had always imagined they'd meet again, maybe share a drink, maybe talk about the past. Instead, Kellen had betrayed him. And now, he was just another body left behind in the Syndicate's warpath. Vayara kept her eyes on the controls, her face unreadable. "You okay?" she asked without looking at him. Ethan exhaled. "I just killed my best friend." Vayara didn't respond immediately. Then, quietly, she said, "He stopped being your friend the moment he sold you out." Ethan let out a bitter chuckle. "Yeah, guess so." They drifted into silence. The stolen ship, the Obsidian Ghost, was fast, untraceable, and packed with advanced stealth tech. Exactly what they needed. But even a ghost couldn't outrun every shadow. Because something was following them. And Ethan could feel it. hunted across the stars. It started as a whisper, a subtle warning deep in his gut. Then, the ship's proximity alarms screamed to life. Vayara's fingers flew over the controls. Something just dropped out of FTL behind us. Ethan twisted in his seat. Syndicate. Vayara's lips pressed into a thin line. Worse. A new ship appeared on the rear holo-display. It wasn't Syndicate military. It wasn't law enforcement. It was something leaner, meaner, and far deadlier. Ethan's blood turned to ice. It was a bounty hunter's ship. A Reaper-class pursuit vessel. Son of a... Ethan's voice caught in his throat. Vayara's hands danced across the controls. I'm activating the stealth systems. If we can lose them in the asteroid belt ahead, we... Boom. The ship lurched violently as something struck their rear thrusters. Ethan cursed. They're already firing. No warning shots. Vayara clenched her jaw. This isn't a Syndicate hit squad. This is a professional. Another impact rocked the ship. The warning lights flickered red. Shields are holding, Vayara muttered, but we won't last long in a firefight. Ethan's mind raced. He wasn't a soldier, but he was an engineer. And he knew one thing. Every ship had weaknesses. Who's after us? He asked. Vayara's face darkened. His name is Korvax the Unrelenting. Ethan groaned. That name doesn't sound fun. Vayara's fingers tightened around the controls. He's not. The legend of Korvax. Ethan didn't know much about bounty hunters, but even he had heard whispers about Korvax. A former warlord. A ruthless killer. A ghost that moved through the galaxy, leaving only death in his wake. And now, he was hunting them. Ethan's pulse pounded. Why would the Syndicate hire someone like him? I thought they had their own assassins. Vayara's jaw clenched. They don't hire Korvax. They fear him. If he's here, it means someone powerful wants you dead personally. Ethan swallowed hard. That wasn't exactly comforting. Another blast rocked the ship. The bounty hunter's vessel was closing the distance fast. Vayara grimaced. We can't outrun him in open space. Ethan's gaze flickered to the holomap. Then his eyes widened. What about that nebula? He pointed at the swirling mass of green gas ahead. Vayara frowned. The Hades Nebula. It's filled with ion storms. We go in there, and our systems might shut down completely. Ethan exhaled. Yeah, but his might too. She hesitated. Then her fingers tightened on the controls. Hold on. She jerked the ship into a hard dive. The obsidian ghost plummeted toward the nebula at full speed. The moment they crossed the threshold, lightning-like energy bursts erupted around them. The ship shuddered violently. The cockpit lights flickered. Ethan gritted his teeth. Tell me this was a good idea. Vayara didn't answer. She didn't have to, because Korvax followed them in. And now, the real hunt began. A game of shadows. The nebula swallowed the two ships whole. The dense green mist crackled with ionized energy, distorting scanners, blocking transmissions, and making navigation nearly impossible. Ethan could barely see more than a few meters ahead. Are we blind? He asked. Vayara shook her head. Not blind. Just guessing. Wonderful. Korvax's ship wasn't firing anymore. It was hunting. Ethan knew why. A bounty hunter like Korvax didn't waste shots in a place like this. He would wait. He would listen. He would strike when they least expected it. A chill ran down Ethan's spine. And then, something moved. A shadow shifted in the mist. A second later, a metal claw tore through the side of their ship. The impact sent Ethan flying into the control panel. Sparks exploded across the cockpit. Vayara let out a sharp curse. He's boarding us. Ethan's mind screamed. That's an option. A loud thud echoed through the hull. Korvax was here. Ethan pushed himself up, his heart hammering. He reached for the nearest weapon, a compact plasma pistol. His fingers trembled around the grip. Vayara's voice was calm, but firm. "If we don't stop him here, we're dead." Ethan swallowed hard. Great pep talk. The airlock hissed. A massive shadow loomed on the other side. Korvax stepped through. The bounty hunter was unlike anything Ethan had ever seen. Towering, armored from head to toe, his mechanical limbs whirred as he stepped forward. A scarlet visor burned through the mist, locking onto Ethan. His voice was deep, mechanical, and final. "Ethan Walker." Ethan raised his pistol. Yeah." Korvax tilted his head slightly. "You will not survive this." Then he charged. The fight for their lives. The next few seconds were a blur. Korvax moved like a machine of war. His clawed gauntlet smashed into Ethan, sending him crashing through the cockpit glass. Vayara lunged, her blade flashing. Korvax blocked it with his cybernetic arm and threw her across the room. Ethan coughed, pain flaring through his ribs. His vision swam, but he forced himself to focus. Korvax was too strong, too fast. They couldn't beat him head-on. They needed another way. His eyes flickered to the control panel. And suddenly, he had an idea. A crazy, stupid, insanely reckless idea. "Vayara," he gasped. "Brace yourself." She barely had time to react before Ethan slammed his fist onto the emergency hyperdrive activation. The ship lurched violently. The damaged thrusters overloaded. The nebula vanished. And suddenly, they were somewhere else entirely. A new beginning. The hyperdrive malfunctioned. Ethan barely had time to register the horrifying realization before the ship was violently ripped out of hyperspace. A sickening lurch twisted his stomach, and for a terrifying moment, the universe itself seemed to bend and shatter around them. Then, the obsidian ghost slammed into reality, the sudden deceleration slamming Ethan against the cockpit seat. Vayara let out a sharp grunt beside him, gripping the controls as warning lights screamed across the dashboard. Ethan barely managed to focus on the view screen. The stars looked wrong. They weren't anywhere near their intended destination. In fact, they weren't anywhere recognizable at all. A dead zone. No beacons, no navigation signals, no known star charts. Where the hell were they? But Ethan had bigger problems. Because the bounty hunter had come with them. Korvax rises. The ship's hull groaned. Ethan turned sharply toward the airlock. The impact of the hyperjump should have ripped Korvax apart. But somehow, Ethan knew better. The bounty hunter wasn't dead. A slow mechanical hiss echoed through the corridor. Then, Thuki, a massive armored fist punched through the reinforced airlock door. Ethan's breath caught. "You've got to be kidding me." Vayara spun toward the weapons console. "If he gets in here, we're dead." Another Thuki. The door bent inward. The metal screamed under the pressure. Korvax was breaking through. Ethan's mind raced. Their weapons couldn't stop him. Their ship was barely holding together. But then, his engineer's brain kicked in. He turned toward the manual release valve near the airlock. A last resort emergency eject system. It was a death sentence in space, a surefire weight he had sucked into the void. But if he could time it just right. "Vayara," he said, moving toward the lever. She understood immediately. "No," she said firmly. "That's suicide." Ethan exhaled. "Only if I go with him." Another punch. The door buckled, sparks raining down. Ethan gritted his teeth. "It's now or never," he said. Vayara hesitated. Then, she moved. Without another word, she grabbed the co-pilot's seat and braced herself. Ethan wrapped his fingers around the manual override. Korvax let out a low mechanical growl as he forced the door apart, his glowing red visor burning like a demon's eye. Ethan met his gaze. Then, he pulled the lever. A desperate gamble. The airlock exploded outward. A powerful vacuum sucked everything toward the void. Korvax, caught mid-step, slammed against the frame, his cybernetic fingers clawing for grip. His massive form was dragged toward the blackness beyond. But he wasn't alone. Ethan felt the violent pull on his body. His breath caught in his throat as the abyss yawned before him. The cold, endless void ripped at his very being. Then, Viara caught him. Her fingers latched onto his wrist, her other hand gripping the emergency tether. The force of the decompression yanked them both forward, but Viara held on. Korvax, however, was not so lucky. His grip slipped. For a brief second, his red visor flickered, as if realizing the mistake. Then, he vanished into the abyss. The last thing Ethan saw was Korvax's outstretched hand, fingers still reaching, before the blackness swallowed him whole. And just like that, the galaxy's most feared bounty hunter was gone. Survivors in the void. Ethan gasped as the ship's emergency seal activated, slamming the airlock shut. The sudden return of pressure knocked the wind out of him. Viara released his wrist, exhaling sharply. That was reckless. Ethan coughed. Worked, didn't it? She shook her head. Next time, maybe tell me the plan before almost dying. He managed a weak grin. Where's the fun in that? Viara just rolled her eyes. But Ethan could tell, despite her usual composure, she was relieved. For the first time in hours, they weren't being hunted. For the first time in days, they had bought themselves a moment of peace. But it wasn't over. Not yet. The final message. Ethan sat back in the pilot's seat, rubbing his temples. All right, let's figure out where the hell we are. Viara pulled up the ship's navigation system. The computer, still struggling to function after the hyperspace malfunction, flickered with error messages. Then, something unexpected happened. A new message appeared on the holoscreen. A pre-recorded transmission. Ethan's breath caught. It was from Tlyvar. Viara stiffened. Play it. Ethan pressed the command. Sivar's face appeared, his blue skin slightly faded, his voice urgent. Ethan, if you're hearing this, then you've made it this far. Ethan's heart pounded. Sivar's voice continued. I need you to listen carefully. Everything you've been through, the inheritance, the syndicate, the bounty hunters, was all part of something bigger. I left you my fortune because you were the only one I could trust. Ethan swallowed hard. Sivar leaned forward, his expression deadly serious. There's something I never told you. The syndicate doesn't just want my fortune. They don't just want control. They're hiding something. Something that could change everything. The message glitched for a moment. Then, Sivar's final words made Ethan's blood run cold. You need to find the Ark of Aethelion. It's the only thing that can stop them. Then, the transmission cut out. A new mission. Silence filled the cockpit. Ethan turned to Viara. Ever heard of the Ark of Aethelion? Viara's face had gone pale. Yes. Ethan frowned. Care to share? She exhaled. It's a myth. A legend. Some say it's a weapon. Others say it's a starship older than time itself. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. And you think it's real? Viara's eyes met his. If the syndicate is willing to kill for it. She nodded grimly. Yes, and if Sivar believed in it, then it's real enough to be dangerous. Ethan let out a slow breath. Well, guess we just went from being fugitives to galactic treasure hunters. Viara smirked. Try not to die in the process. Ethan grinned. No promises. As the ship powered up again, Ethan stared into the endless void ahead. He had inherited Sivar's fortune. Now, he had inherited his war. And the real fight had only just begun.